The last panel session for today is going to be on the subject of media transformations. As we all know, media is truly at an inflection point. It is one of the industries that has been most affected and influenced by the dramatic changes we've seen in technology. It's no longer a matter of traditional media being augmented by digital media. It's now a matter of entirely new content models and channels being created, which is causing a true transformation and blurring the lines among media and its functions and forms. This dramatic change actually has reminded me of a quote by Canadian academic Marshall McLuhan, who proclaimed, "The medium is the message." Little did he know how prophetic this message was then and really remains today. A question for the audience. When was this statement made? Long before the cell phone, the personal computer, and the commercialization of the internet. Any guesses? Close, 68? One? No, it was 1964. Bingo, you're the winner. I guess one could say Marshall was truly a visionary and way ahead of his time. Today's panel will be led by Linda Boff, who will talk about the current and future state of media and how organizations are employing it in its varied shapes and forms. Linda is the Global Executive Director of Advertising at General Electric, and in this capacity, she oversees GE's digital marketing, social media, content, commercial strategy on a global basis. In 2012, Linda was named to B2B Magazine's Digital Marketer of the Year. And a more personal note, I'm to understand she's also a big New York Giants fan. Go G-Men. Linda will be joined on the panel by a group representing some of the most recognizable names in the media business. Dan Roth, Executive Editor for LinkedIn. Tim Reese, Head of Mobile and Social Solutions for the Americas for Google. And Louis Dvorkin, Chief Product Officer for Forbes. Please join me in welcoming the media panel. Thanks.
Carl, thank you so much for that nice introduction. Guys, come on up. So you're in for a real treat this afternoon. I'm going to do some very short bios just so you have a sense as to who's up here with me, and then we'll get into it. So you heard Carl say this, but I think it's worth noting. Dan, to my left, is not only executive editor of LinkedIn, but he's overseeing LinkedIn Today, which if you haven't checked it out, terrific new tool on LinkedIn. Dan has a wonderful editorial background, and I think you're going to find that in common with the folks up here, that I think is sort of driving a lot of the way that these gentlemen are all thinking. Dan actually was part of Louis's staff at one point earlier in his career. He was managing editor of Fortune, as well as a senior writer at Wired magazine. Some of the stories he wrote for Wired are some of the most iconic ones that the magazine has published. Louis Dvorkin, Chief Product Officer at Forbes Media. He's responsible for the digital and print operations. He has really, I think for those of you who've spent time on Forbes.com, and I imagine that's most of us, has really reinvented the way Forbes.com exists, redesigned Forbes magazine. Louis has an amazing journalistic background at AOL, page one editor of Wall Street Journal, senior editor at Newsweek, editor at the New York Times. I think you get the idea. And certainly last but not least, Tim Reese leads Google's mobile and social efforts, as you heard. He's a 30-plus year veteran of media sales roles that have spanned TV, online, print, et cetera, not only at Google, at Plum TV, Forbes, and Fortune magazine. So there's a nice thread of Fortune and Forbes that runs across the group here. So I thought, because many of you in the room here today are part of big brands, part of business brands, that we'd start with something that feels a little self-serving as I'm sitting up here now. But I thought I would start by sharing with you what GE has done in the social space, because we think of it as fairly transformational. And I thought it would be a nice jumping off point to then talk about how transformation is taking place at some media channels, so big media channels. So if we could just play the video.
welcome to this week's Stump the Scientist. We're here with our Chief Scientist, Jim Bright. Our question this week comes from Brock Martin, who wonders if permanent magnets are really permanent.
In zero gravity, do the laws of centrifugal force still apply?
How is the buildup of electricity in the human body happening? And
is wireless power transmission possible?
So I'll just say for GE, transformation has really meant being a bit of a content producer ourselves and a content marketer, and that's been quite a transformation for us. So Dan, talk about media transformation at LinkedIn. What are you doing, and what should everybody in this audience think about?
First, thanks for having me up here. This is great, and I'm honored to be on stage with these folks and in front of you guys. At LinkedIn, so I joined about a year ago to oversee all of our content that comes in to LinkedIn through news organizations. We have about 1 million publishers who right now feed into LinkedIn through the little in-share button you kind of see everywhere, and we've got algorithms that look at what people are reading and sharing and commenting on, and then we've got an editorial team that also works with the algorithm to make sure we're getting the right news in front of the right people. That's a big part of my job. I also work on managed groups. We have some groups where we'll have our own moderators who are working with brands to make sure that that we are engaging with the LinkedIn audience around particular topics. And everything that I work on is really around engagement. It's how we measure success. It's how we are trying to figure out whether we're heading down the right channels or not. It's a question of, are we getting the right information to the right people to make them more successful at what they do? And I think that I wouldn't have joined LinkedIn had it not been making a transformation itself, which was going from a company that was really about, in its early days, connecting people with each other, and being a place for your online business persona, to a place that does that plus connects people with insights. And I'm really just working on the idea of what are the right insights? What does that even mean to connect people with it? And I think for brands, the big question is, how do you get in that stream of insights? How do you provide those? How do you learn from it? How do you connect with the business audience?
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, Lewis and I and a couple other colleagues were talking before this about the fact that Forbes.com in particular, was so early in sort of this media transformation that they were there kind of before brands in some ways. So just talk a little bit about what you've done and where you are now.
Well, we're doing so much. Whenever I have to answer that question, I don't know where to begin. But we're really creating very disruptive models. Disruptive models for content creation, disruptive models for marketers and how they reach their audience. We are reinventing newsroom processes, and it all is because of digital publishing, social media, mobile now, and the economics have changed. And I often say the economics of journalism are busted, and they are. And we have a goal to create a sustainable model for journalism. And in that sustainable model, it means inviting many individuals to participate who are experts, be it an expert journalist or an academic or a marketer. We have a view that content is content. It's a world of transparency. So, and we have the great benefit of having an awesome brand and a great print product that really travels well around the world. So the print brand and the new digital world we're trying to create all reinforce each other.
I think there's something very big there for everybody in this room. This idea of redefining experts. Many of us in the B2B space we always think about thought leadership, we think about expertise, and I think this twist on who is an expert and are people experts and what does it take to sort of play in that space is fascinating. Tim, mobile and social. Wow. So talk about what you're doing at Google. Google sort of invented disruption, right?
Yeah, actually, I hadn't
Some
thought
ways.
about that. We do a lot of disruption, and I think our mobile and social plays grew not necessarily out of our disrupting that space, but recognizing that there was an evolution taking place in the marketplace. Consumers were moving in a direction, technology was leading them forward. I somehow, as everyone was speaking, I was thinking that this might be a relevant place to mention this concept I talk about a lot, which is, what was it, 15, 20 years ago that they cloned Dolly the sheep? You remember Dolly the sheep? Mm-hmm. And everybody went, yay, we cloned a sheep, and then almost immediately went, should we be cloning sheep? What do we do with the second sheep? What rights does the second sheep have? What else might we clone? And that was certainly one whole thing, but fast forward and Facebook comes along and everyone starts sharing, saying, look at this, I'm sharing all this stuff with my friends. And then they go, oh God, I've got an interview on Monday and I've shared all this stuff. And maybe people shouldn't see that stuff. And where I'm headed is that our ethical structures, our embrace of these things always lags the capability.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And I'm proud to be part of a company whose mission statement at a time when they were two guys in a garage was to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. It didn't actually say anything about search, and it gave us the breadth. It gave us direction so that we're not going to buy a hockey team, but it gave us the breadth to evolve into mobile and social and to buy YouTube when we did that and DoubleClick and those kind of things. So it's I guess where I'm headed with all of this is just that it is part of a recognition of the evolution of media in general, and we're just kind of riding the wave and moving with it and trying to make smart decisions in that space.
Well, let's dig under the covers a little bit. Something that Dan has shared with me, and frankly I'd heard about it before this, was what LinkedIn has done very successfully with Citigroup. Talk a little bit about that. I think it helps make it real for folks to understand what
Sure.
brands are doing.
Yeah, so if you go on LinkedIn we have a group called Connect, the network for professional women, powered by Citi. It's a group that targets women in the workforce, women out of the workforce, women who want to share ideas and get insight into getting back into work or any kind of issues they're having. It's become, and Citi, who really wanted to reach professional women, and they believe that women are the chief household officers and that they are the ones that make significant decisions about any kind of financial decisions. Certainly true in my house. That this is that they need to be in front of them. And I think with a brand, what I thought was so interesting about this idea is that it's orthogonal to Citi's actual business, and they come into this group and they just talk about issues around workplace. And in this group, we've got 60,000 women in the group right now. Started in April. The engagement is one of our top groups on LinkedIn. Engagement is through the roof. And it's so engaging that a lot of the women have started doing meetups outside of LinkedIn in real life to meet with each other. One woman started a company using two people she met in the group.
That's great.
And what Citi's done is they have this, at scale, they can reach a huge number of people they want to reach. But it's also this kind of one-on-one level where they're talking, and when they are in the group, there's probably 4 people from Citi who are constantly in the group. And they talk not as the Citi brand and not with any kind of corporate speak, and it's not vetted by PR ahead of time. They speak as real people who happen to be at Citi. And they get invited to the meetups, and they get thanked for sponsoring the group. And it's a way so that we operate at the scale, but they get to talk in this one-on-one level. And I think it's pretty amazing. And it's incredible to me to watch a big bank do something like this. I feel like if a bank can do it, just about any company can, considering all the regulation and
they're behaving as individuals, not as a big entity.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a great example. So I think we've got some real very well respected journalists up here, and when we were on the phone prepping for this, Lewis was talking to us about Forbes not just having a newsroom, but having a brand newsroom, and I thought that was a great concept. Will you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. What Dan's talking about is authenticity. And it's frankly as difficult for a journalist to be authentic as it is a brand to be authentic.
Really?
Because we online, and that's one of the things that we're trying to help our journalists understand. You want to connect with the audience, And in connecting with the audience, you need to have engagement and a voice. So as we built the system to be able to do that, with audience development and data systems and all processes, we've created this new kind of editorial newsroom that has 1,000 folks connecting with 30 million users. Well, now we're taking that model and we're mirroring it and building a brand newsroom that takes the learnings from editorial and moves them into the brand newsroom. There are separations. The editorial newsroom reports up to edit and brand reports up to sales. But the brand newsroom is working with companies like yourself to help them reach an audience in a very non-disruptive way. And much like on Citibank, to be authentic about it, so it's a human voice behind it and a human engagement, and that's what the brand newsroom is about.
That's such a great concept. It feels like we all should have come up with it a long time ago, so good for you guys.
Can I just jump in for 1 second?
Yeah,
I just
jump
want
in.
to comment that one of the things that Forbes does that I think is really interesting too is that, and I don't know if it's with brands also, but that everyone at Forbes is, and correct me if I'm sorry to speak about your business, but they are all.
I'll talk about yours.
The reporters are measured on engagement. It's not just traffic, it's comments, and so we see in the Citigroup in particular, Forbes reporters coming in and generating conversation and pulling people back to Forbes, which is fine, but sharing stories in there. And it's the same kind of thing that for brands you would expect the same thing. You have to be, there are no walls anymore.
Right. That's what I was trying to say. As difficult it is for a brand to say, let me connect one-on-one because the control issues and things like that. Well, journalists have control issues. I can't talk to a reader, you know, that would be breaking the wall, right? Well, you know, there you go.
You know, this idea of authenticity, we all talk about it all the time, right? You know, what is authenticity? Part of it is trust. And when Tim and I were talking the other day, we were talking about mobile, which is on all of our minds, and you use this great phrase, which is, you know, your mobile device is sort of inside the circle of trust. Is that what you said? It's kind of like, forget the Meet the Parents movie. I don't think that's circle of trust, different circle of trust. So talk about what you mean by that, and what does it mean for brands? What's kind of their obligation?
Sure. Well, you know, it started as a consumer marketing idea, but I think it applies to B2B. And in fact, I'm disappointed. She may be here somewhere, but there was a young lady who was sitting over here in the last session who had questions about, well, we're a bank, we're kind of conservative, we have, you know, constraints around how we can communicate, and cool that you're doing these cool things, but does that apply to me? And my reaction listening to that was totally understanding that there are a lot of businesses with a lot of constraints about what you can say, but while you may be working hard to appear conservative and responsible in the face of considerable responsibilities, you run the risk of looking ossified because your market is moving to devices like this. Because the people, whether a consumer or a B2B buyer, they're consuming more and more content on these tiny mobile computers. And you might say, well, they're kind of you know, lightweight in more ways than just you know, in the metaphysical sense. It was a little while ago that, oh, I'm going to forget her name now, and she's famous. She's a money manager analyst.
Mary Meeker.
That's her. Thank you. Mary Meeker at an event at our place said, you know, let's face it, every new technology, the first use is asinine, right? For those of us who are old enough to remember when fax machines first showed up, what was the most frequent thing coming through your fax machine? There were jokes. Generally emanating from Wall Street for some reason. They all start down there. And gags were coming over your fax machine. The internet comes out, you know, what's the first big thing on the internet? It's porn, you know. But eventually it evolves into
still be.
Might still be, yes. Still a pretty good business. But the point is that it evolves as people learn how to do cooler and cooler things. And the point that we talked about on the phone was, this is a device that is physically closer to consumers than others. They're deeply personal. How many of you sleep with your phone next to your bed? That's sad, but
two
honest.
phones.
Yeah. Two phones next to your bed. One of you can put your hand down. About 25% of all people take the phone with them to the bathroom. I'm not going to ask. The point is, these are, I mean, literally when you show someone something on your phone, if I were, you know, were showing Lewis, I would say, hey, check this out. I wouldn't say, hey, look what's on my phone, because it's my phone.
If I may,
Please,
I
please.
wrote a post about this morning.
I read it. That's where I got the idea.
I'm sure. Digital publishing changed journalism and marketing, and this is going to change it yet again. And it really is about, for marketers and journalists, you need to have non-disruptive experiences on this. And non-disruptive experiences are more content experiences than they are boxes and squares and rectangles and things like that. They need to be part of the flow because the screen's not big enough and people want information. So how you develop that non-disruptive marketing and journalism, that's really going to be the key to that thing, because we see the growth rates are tremendous.
Well,
Tremendous.
and this was what Linda and I talked about, was I typically talk about this in terms of that being inside the circle of trust comes with an opportunity, you're inside the circle of trust, and an obligation, which is don't yell at me. I don't need that in here. But as some of the speakers earlier talked about, there's this opportunity to make yourself useful. And bear in mind that useful, and this ties back to authenticity, useful can be a lot of things. It can be make me laugh. It can be teach me to do something, help me find something, help me understand something. It can be help me kill 5 minutes because the bus is late. I mean, it can be a lot of things, but it should be something that's authentic to your brand.
Lewis, were you trying to get in on
No,
this?
I've read that a lot of the LinkedIn usage is on mobile. It's people on their way to job interviews and wanting to check things out. Or
Yeah,
whatever.
we see, and the LinkedIn Today traffic has skyrocketed since as mobile has become an increasing way that people use LinkedIn. You get a couple quick headlines, you go and you read the stories, you come back, you're waiting in line, or you're about to go into an interview and you go see, on our iPad app, we have this way, we show you your full calendar and everyone who you're meeting with, all their LinkedIn backgrounds, and that's been, people love that. So.
I just want to make a comment about non-disruptive before we transition into something. As a brand, it's something we talk about a lot, and I think it's part of what's propelled us to go to social channels, which is how can we be places where we can be part of the conversation. I'll be curious, and maybe you have a view on this. I think it will ultimately change the face of how a lot of brands look at digital advertising. For us, the banner as we know it today isn't the banner as we know it tomorrow. It will have to, we think, be replaced by much more native content, things that are more ingrained in the experience. So I don't know. I don't know if anybody has thoughts on that.
This isn't a thought on that. This is more of a thought on how, sitting from where I sit and watching brands try to struggle with this, I'm always shocked by the internal power struggle that seems to go on where companies figure out how to give up the control necessary to create the kind of content that consumers want. And it means saying there is not, the chief marketing officer doesn't get to say, yes, I'm signing off on every single thing you're doing. I get to see everything that goes through. And I think as journalists, we also went through this period where you realize you can't even read everything that's showing up on your site anymore. There has to be, you have to start giving up control. And I think that watching this battle go on is going to be, I think some companies get it more than others, and but everyone's going to have to figure out how to deal with that.
It's pretty fascinating. I mean, one of our lenses is, does it sound like a real person? If it doesn't sound like a real person, it shouldn't be up on social media. Otherwise, it belongs in a press release. Mm-hmm. So, that's a litmus test and a lot of freedom. Our head of social, I don't want to say he never checks with us, but he does. But nonetheless, he has a lot of freedom. And I think what's important, it goes back to authenticity, is who are you as a brand? Who, I don't know, Tim, what are some of your thoughts from folks you've seen?
I was thinking about what Dan was saying about control. I think control has always been a myth. Yeah. That we set up these structures and we like to believe we're in control, but the market was always talking about brands and was always feeding back.
But they couldn't broadcast it like
that's true. They didn't have as big a bullhorn. But the old saw was a satisfied customer was maybe telling one person, and a dissatisfied one was telling 10. Yeah. It's a little parallel. It's not exactly on point. But I remember when I started my own business in Georgia, I saw a friend at Time Inc. at the time, and he said, "Wow, you're in the middle of the ocean without a life preserver." And I said, "You're absolutely right. But for the record, all of you here are in the same ocean, and every one of you is holding tight to a Polaroid of a life preserver. You know, the difference is, you know, I know what situation I'm in, and you're deluded. You know, and I think it's the same thing for companies. I think they like to pretend if I have my lawyers running everything, you know, through them, and that we're very careful that they have this enormous amount of control. That's really more ethereal than they think it is.
Let's take this to the level of transparency, because in talking to all of you and sort of hearing about how you are transforming the channels that you're on, I always wonder, what's the obligation that brands have, that media channels have to the user? How transparent do you need to be? Do you need to slug things and say, wait, this is coming from an advertiser? You know, what's the bright white light?
Transparency is the key.
Yeah.
Transparency gives permission, or at least the ability to do everything that we're talking about. The reality is that, you know, in the old world of media, we need to protect the consumer, right? Well, there's a different consumer out there that's far more knowledgeable, far more savvy, and with a click of a mouse can verify or see whether you're telling the truth or not. So with that type of audience, they just want great information. And if you tell them it's a journalist, or if you tell them it's a marketer, or if you tell them it's an academic or an author, they get the agenda, they get where they're coming from, and once you do that, you provide yourself with a great freedom to reaching out and connecting to people.
Because what happens when you have that transparency, but you also have marketers who are on the Forbes, you know, who are writing on the Forbes platform, and the comments start filling up with people saying negative things, or someone else at Forbes does a story that might be, you know, against what something that SAP is doing, or two brands are both are part of the brand newsroom, and they are going against each other.
I can't wait till that happens.
Yeah.
We have an opportunity, we think, in the next few weeks. We have two very big competitors in the same space. We're waiting for them, which Forbes wants to be a forum.
Yeah.
That's the deal. LinkedIn is a forum. You have discussion in managed groups. We're a forum. And, you know, one of the things I'm very proud of, and you have a civil conversation on LinkedIn, we have a very civil conversation because every marketer, every journalist has to moderate the conversation. And in moderating that conversation, you get rid of the noise, and you get rid of the anger, and you develop rewarding. It's a new work for a marketer. It's a new work for a journalist. But that's how it needs to be. So whether it's a lot of back and forth and yelling at each other, as long as it's productive, that's okay.
You know, I've had this conversation not with the three of you, but with other media companies, which is, you know, I started off deliberately showing all of you what we're doing at GE. We're creating a lot of content. We're spending a lot of effort, we're spending a lot of money, we're spending a lot of time creating content. And a few media companies, none of the ones up here, have said to me, well, you're disintermediating us. You know, what are you doing? So I'd love your thoughts and reaction. I don't feel bad about it, by the way, but I just...
That's called being disruptive,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
You know, I mean...
So I don't know. You know, I feel like we all have to kind of put on different hats sometimes and think differently.
Isn't it the obligation of the platform to add value? Yeah. So you know, Forbes creating a forum, you know, the old man, before he passed away, used to talk about, you know, the boys would say, Dad, why are all these CEOs on the boat talking to each other? We're not selling them anything. He said, yeah, we are. The more they talk to each other, the more we sell stuff. The same idea. If you can provide a place that's a powerful place for people to come together, that recognize this is a salon, you know, that we're under this heading, we can have a conversation, that's adding value.
Yeah.
Where media companies fall down, I think, is where there is no value, where they are disintermediated because they're vestigial.
You know, it's really interesting. If you look at the history of the media business and you go back 100 years, what we're talking about today existed 100 years ago. You had marketers on the front pages of newspapers. You had owners flogging their papers. You had all sorts of voices all over the place. And
soap detergent
yeah,
sort of dancing on the Today Show, right?
Then we got industrialized and commoditized and all that kind of stuff. And then technology moved forward again and broke it all wide open, right? So the folks you're talking about are living in an era of technology that worked for 50 or 60 years, and they have to be in tune to the new era of technology, which is saying, hey, Everybody's out there, everybody can participate. But control, if marketers like control, so do journalists like control.
So I think that I watch what the most shared stories are across LinkedIn, and we had this last week. One of the fifth most shared story was a story that appeared on Zillow's blog. It was about home prices, renting being, buying homes being 45% cheaper than renting in all the major markets. It was a great story. It was filled with data. It was really interesting. It was the kind of story that should have been in the New York Times. Maybe it was in the New York Times, but what readers wanted was this Zillow blog that was authentic to them. Zillow never talked about themselves in it, just mentioned the data that they had. And it was written with, it was a really well-written piece. And the readers didn't care. All they wanted was the information.
Great.
And I think that is, we see this with the Citigroup also. The City has a property called Women & Co., which I believe that you're familiar with.
I helped start the brand.
There we go. and they have great pieces, and we feed them in. They feed into LinkedIn Today, and they don't feed into LinkedIn Today because we say we have a contractual obligation to feed into LinkedIn Today. They feed into LinkedIn Today because it's great content and people engage with it. And that's, it is disintermediating, but the readers and the users and our members don't care.
We've had moments where the most popular post on Forbes.com was written by a marketer, fully identified as a marketer. And the key was, marketers, like media people, have agendas. But you got to realize what your agenda is may not be what the user is interested in.
Right.
So if you can take what you are interested in and understand what the reader agenda is at that time and match the two, then you become a most popular post on Forbes.com. And that's what a couple marketers have realized is, hey, we have an agenda, but let's find out what their agenda is and how do we connect the two.
I mentioned this to Tim on the phone. A friend of mine, some of you know him, Noah Breyer at Percolate, wrote a post in Ad Age, and he talked about how brands need to start behaving like people on social channels, which I thought was fairly insightful, because I think it gets at this idea of authenticity and credibility. Tim, what are your thoughts on that?
And it's a very old example, but and they've had missteps since then, but I always think back on the comparison between the Exxon Valdez and Johnson & Johnson when the first tampering episode took place. And Exxon Valdez, years passed, nobody went there. The CEO, none of the executive team went up to Alaska. But in the Tylenol case, the CEO of the company got on the news that night and said, this is what our product looks like. If you've got it at home, throw it out. Don't buy it at the store. And the lawyers were having heart attacks, and the communication people were having heart attacks, and he said, it's the right thing to do. Yeah. And that was a human moment. That was a giant company acting like a human being. And I think, again, it connects back to that idea of authenticity. It's really critical. As Lewis said, the consumer is hugely savvy now. They're no longer confused about this, that it says in small type advertorial on the top of it, and they're like, no, but it feels like editorial. They know. Yeah. They understand how it works. Watch MSG's, high school sports channel, and when the junior at the local high school football team comes off and says to the camera, well, I just want to thank Jesus for the, everybody's media savvy now, it's no longer about them and us. It's one big pool.
I can tell you at GE, it's one of our maxims. The more human, the more accessible, the more real we are, the more we're able to connect with folks, period. Because we're a big company, we're diverse, 300,000 employees, hundreds of, literally operating in hundreds of countries. And, when we behave like a human being, it's just more appealing.
Do you let your employees, then, everyone at GE has the power to tweet and post to LinkedIn as they see?
Yes and no. And I say yes and no not because they don't have the ability. What we find, and I don't know if this is true of other marketers here, is employees want some training wheels and want some guidelines, to be perfectly honest. Not the people who work in digital marketing who are quite savvy. But so, like a lot of big companies, we have social media guidelines. And I actually find it helps people, because people don't really want to screw up. But, some of it also comes from the top. I mean, our chairman has been on Twitter for 10 days, and people are kind of excited about it. So, you know, some of that helps a little bit. So look, I want to get to questions out here. You can start thinking about them. I'm going to ask these guys just a lightning round as you get ready to raise your hand, and that is, give us a prediction. You can pick anything: video, social, mobile, next year to 3 years. What are you excited about, or what are we going to say?
I started the conversation.
Yeah.
So I'll refer back to the American Banker event and the will people be opening checking accounts on mobile phones? Within 2 years, more people are going to access the internet on mobile devices than desktop devices. That's not a prediction, that's a fact. And at that time, they're going to do everything on these devices. And they will have had their Dolly the Sheep moment and will be perfectly comfortable sharing because, getting back to the other thing we talked about, because the device will prove itself that the more you share with me, the more valuable I'll be to you. That's my big prediction, is that we will learn how to be creative on this platform, to make authentic connections on this platform, and that the people on the other end that we as marketers are talking to are going to be good with that. This will be their favorite way to deal with you.
That's great. Lewis?
I know it seems like what we're talking about here, but I believe next to your brands as publishers, as content creators, is the single biggest trend in the media business today, and it's going to shake up advertising, and it's going to shake up journalism, and that's just it.
I think that's a big thing for people here to take away. I really do. Dan?
I think I would say that what we were just talking about with the idea of people getting more comfortable sharing, I think that you're going to see that increasingly move right through companies, and it's just going to be something that, as it's part of the loss of control, is watching everyone in your company share things all the time and learning how to live with that and enjoy it and punish from times and reward it at other times.
I'll make a comment, not a prediction. I'll leave that to these three. But I speak often around our company. We're an old company. We can be a little bit conservative at times. And I find people will raise their hand and say, isn't it risky to be doing this? And to me, the greatest risk is not doing it. The greatest risk is not listening. The greatest risk is not engaging and pretending it's not happening. So with that, what questions do you have? No questions?
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Yes, Tom.
I wanted to ask the three gentlemen. So we have clients. It's a good thing we're an ad agency. We have clients, and we have the clients sometimes have budgets, which is also a good thing. What are the shiny new things in your toolkits that we should be thinking about? So we're trying to reach business decision makers. What are some of the really cool things that you guys are doing that we should be aware of?
I guess I would probably say I think that our company follower at LinkedIn, the ability to reach people who are following certain companies is pretty great. There's something like 2 million. This might be, I'm not sure if I have the numbers exactly right, 2 million company pages, and I think it's a survey we did that showed that 70% of people who are following a company expect to get insight, industry insight from these companies. So it is, you have people who are choosing to follow you, and if you're not giving them back information, it's a lost opportunity. So I would say that one seems really cool to me. Get right into the flow. If people are spending their day on LinkedIn as a brand, you have a chance to get right into the way that they're working.
I don't know if this is cool, because I don't generally chase bright, shiny objects, but we're actually have basic tools, really great tools that we give to marketers that belong to journalists, and everybody uses those same tools. And you have access to those tools like I do. You can create video, you can create photos, you can create text, you can share, you can do this and that. So what I think is exciting and cool is that we're putting everybody on the same level playing field to be able to talk to one another.
There are two big things that we're focused on, happen to be the two things that I work on. Go figure. On the social side, we are having success in developing a whole new view of social. We are not trying to be the next Facebook or the next LinkedIn. We're not trying to be a destination, although there's a destination involved. If you've heard or read Larry Page talk about it, we're working on a social spine. The concept being that social is a part of everything we do, and we should incorporate social signals to make everything that users and marketers do more effective. So you're already seeing social signals play a role in search. You will see social playing a role in video, in display advertising, and on and on and on. You'll see more and more social input into that platform. And that will be as profound a thing for B2B marketers as it is for B2C. On the mobile side, the big development is there are a lot of conversions that take place on mobile that aren't really captured. You know, people who, again, in a B2C context, who download directions to the store. Nobody's capturing that and saying that was part of a conversion. So I'm actually speaking next week at Adweek about what we're calling the full value of mobile, which is the first step in trying to define what is mobile's role in a multi-screen world. What's the real consumer pathway where they might be researching on desktop and converting on you know, their smartphone, or researching on tablet and getting directions on their phone and going to the store, or any number of paths. Eventually, we hope to be at the point where we can actually trace conversions across all those different screens, and that'll be a really profound insight.
I agree that the consumers become smarter, but there's a lot of smart people in this room, and I think they'd agree with me that still what seems to be very mysterious is privacy, user privacy. And I imagine with mobile coming into all of our lives even more aggressively, it's going to open up even more questions about user privacy. So I'd just like to hear a little bit about where you all stand on this, because it really, truly is. I'm on Facebook. I really don't know my controls. It's very mysterious. So any comments about where privacy stands with your companies?
Incredibly important. I think that it's you know, we're a different kind of platform. It's all professionals. It's work. It's your work environment. But privacy is taken very seriously, and you know, you can control the privacy controls are pretty simple to use. It's not. I think there's a difference between being on Facebook and putting your kids' pictures up and versus being on LinkedIn and updating where you're working. But we take it incredibly, and I think it's really important. So.
The same with us, you know, the whole issue of cookies and whatnot. We talk about it all the time. We don't know who our users are. You know, we can't track them by name. You know, by big massive groups we can for sure, like everybody does. But we talk about it, and we're actually European privacy issues are even different, and we've adjusted our website to be able to handle that. So it's always a conversation at Forbes.
I wish I could remember who said it, but a couple of years ago, some marketer had commented that, you know, we've already studied it and have identified that a significant portion of the population will gladly give you their social security number in exchange for a 50-cent off coupon. So there are a lot of people who aren't that concerned about privacy. On the other hand, we obviously take it very, very seriously. I'd like to say, you know, I'm a big LinkedIn user, and I really appreciate the way LinkedIn treats privacy, because as you start to get more and more requests from people who you've never heard of, you know, some of them you really do just want to hold off, and I've always felt comfortable in that environment. We're taking it very seriously, and especially in the mobile domain, moving very cautiously. I mean, there are things that technologically are capable or within our capabilities that we won't do unless and until the public is comfortable with that. That said, I do believe we're going to become more and more open as a people. I think people are going to see the value proposition and say, I'm getting more and more from this the more I share. And as long as we can do that in a secure way that doesn't jeopardize people, I think that'll continue as a trend.
It's very generational. If anybody has a 19-year-old or younger child, they view privacy vastly different than we do.
Vastly.
And until it hits them in the face for whatever reason, right?
Yeah, I certainly, of course, privacy is critically important. I'm often reminded not so terribly long ago how worried we all were about putting our credit card number in when we went shopping online. I don't remember the last time I worried about that.
I'm curious about this room, though. I mean, I would assume that you guys must hear all the time from ad networks saying we can tell you exactly who we're targeting, and there is a lot of technology out there that can get you the exact right people and tell you a lot about it. So it seems like in this room there's a challenge too to protect, to not always jump at something that will get you to those people or tell you more than your consumers want to know.
That's a really good point. We probably have time for one more question. I think we had one over here.
Thanks. So most of us and most people out there, I would assume, are using their mobile devices, their tablet devices to not only access content, but access the latest content that's out there. You're constantly refreshing your app, even when you're standing in line for the bus. How do you weigh pushing out content quickly, because the user is going to go to whoever has the freshest content, the newest content? How do you balance pushing out content with the quality of that content? So both for Dan and Tim, but also for GE as well, because you want to keep pushing out content, keep the user coming back to see something new. How do you balance that, the time, with the quality?
Can I take a quick stab at this one? And I wish I had made this up. This was an agency that we sometimes work with, was telling us the other day that they view content in a 8-week, 8-day, 8-hour, 8-minute, sort of 4 different flows. I thought that was one of the smartest things I'd heard in a while, because I think different content works at different times, and long form, more permanent, sort of stock content is something that you take great care in, you polish it up, etc. If you're in an 8-minute situation, which I think for a lot of people is often a crisis situation, you act very differently. So I think there isn't, I'm dodging the question and trying to answer it at the same time. I'm not sure there is one answer, because I think it really does depend on what you're trying to do from a content point of view, how proactive you are, how reactive you are. So I don't know, you guys probably have different views.
I think Lewis has got
Yeah,
a better
I can speak to that,
course.
because the reality is that the news consumer has a voracious appetite for content. And quality and quantity is what plays on the digital space today. The trick is, and we have 1,000 people publishing, we publish 500 posts a day. If you edit the talent coming in the door properly, then that really solves a lot of problems. And that's what we need to do. We need to edit the talent and make sure that they have the experience, and then you let them go. And the self-correcting nature of the web takes over, and it's very fascinating to watch.
So I hope you'll join me in thanking Dan, Lewis, and Tim for a great conversation. It's really good.